Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. On Sunday afternoon, Trent Alexander-Arnold was booed at Anfield. So why do supporters boo their players? And is it ever acceptable? Here with us today, having been at Anfield on Sunday, our Liverpool correspondent James Pearce, as well as senior football writer Oli Kay as well. James, let's start with you on this one. Look, we're still, 4 days away from Trent Alexander-Arnold being booed at Anfield. Have you, and I've listened to the Walk On podcast, we'll talk about it later, but have you managed to make sense of it yet properly?
It's been interesting speaking to people who were there about it because, I've never known anything really generate that kind of emotion and the range of emotions because, and the people I've spoken to tend to be in three different camps. There's those that booed and jeered him and feel betrayed by his decision to leave for Real Madrid. The fact that he's a local lad and he'd previously talked about wanting to be captain, that kind of adds to it for people. Then I think there's almost a second group where they hated the booing. It was like, that isn't what we do. You don't boo someone while they're still wearing a Liverpool shirt, but I'm furious with him for leaving. And then the third group who are kind of very much in the camp of, come on, he's given us 20 years of his life. He wants a new challenge. He wants to step out of his comfort zone. He's always given his best for Liverpool. If that's what he wants, let's all move on. Why would we want someone to stick around that isn't still fully committed? It's certainly generated kind of one hell of a response.
Yeah, I mean, it has been quite a divisive response, Ollie. Over 550 comments and James's match piece on The Athletic. And I'm not here to tell anyone how to feel about a certain thing, but this definitely has got a lot of people flustered a little bit, hasn't it?
Well, it has. And I read through some of the 550 comments on James's match piece, and I always feel like at The Athletic, the comments section is an awful lot better than you get, in terms of quality and nuance and understanding and people being reasonable and intelligent. It's an awful lot better than you get a lot of the time on the sort of cesspit of X or or wherever, Twitter. I felt reading through those comments, look, there are some comments here which I really don't agree with, but which are being really well made. There's a range of opinion, clearly a range of opinion, as James said. There are people who are livid with Trent Alexander-Arnold. There are people who are fans who are livid with the fans who booed. And I think there's probably a lot of rubberneckers from other fan bases who are probably sitting there loving it and thinking, look, Liverpool fighting amongst themselves. Liverpool fans, having seen them so happy and so joyous a couple of weeks earlier, that people are probably seeing them squabbling and booing one of their own. And I think there's probably a certain kind of satisfaction from some fan bases being taken in that. But it's I think I can look, booing would never be for booing your own player would not be for me. And I know a lot of Liverpool fans feel the same, but I can understand the dissatisfaction with him. I can understand that when a player is leaving in these circumstances, that not everyone wants to give him the happy, cheery send-off that they gave Roberto Firmino, for example. It's a different situation when somebody has run their contract down and not really sort of engaged, not really discussed it. And I think Trent Alexander-Arnold was aware of all the ill feelings, and he said in his video, I know people are going to be disappointed. I don't know whether he knew how disappointed or how many people would be angry with it, but it's a multi-layered conversation rather than, I think, just saying yes, you should boo him, no, you shouldn't boo him. I think it's a very complicated one, which we can hopefully get into.
Sometimes I wonder in modern football, whether it's about the club controlling narratives, James, or whether it's the footballers controlling narratives of how they exit as well. But also, look, these are businesses, right? To a certain degree. Liverpool have had a great season all round. Looks like they're going to get some money from the Champions League run. They've won the Premier League. Looks like there's more money coming in as well. The club is in a good shape. But, you know, he does make an interesting case there. Can you understand the heightened sense of emotion? Because this is quite a unique case, especially around a local player in many respects.
Yeah, I can understand it. Yeah, I mean, I must admit, because Sunday night when I was coming away from Anfield, I was thinking to myself, you know, in all the years I've been going since 1990, I couldn't think of anything like it in terms of the scale of the reaction, in terms of how vitriolic it was. And I think back to, people made a lot of about. I remember Lucas Leiva getting booed during a game against Fulham at Anfield in 2008, but it was never on that level. Not even someone like Roy Hodgson, who dragged Liverpool to the brink of a relegation battle, was booed. It was more kind of the ironic cheers of Hodgson for England from the Kop. And of course on Sunday, it started off very subtle in terms of the Steven Gerrard song, and it was like, and I thought to myself when Trent was stood on that touchline, I thought, that's clever, because you're making your point. Gerrard is absolutely adored so many years on, because as much of an elite midfielder he also showed incredible loyalty in the face of repeated attempts to prize him away. Then they sang the Conor Bradley song, a nod to Liverpool's future. But then, obviously, there was a significant minority who felt they needed to boo and jeer. And I think it is because the fact we've never really been in this situation, as Simon articulated there. The fact he is a local lad, and also the fact he's so good. That's the thing. If he wasn't so good, it wouldn't create such emotion. But you're talking about, one of the best English players of his generation, as we've said, someone who had previously talked about being a one club man, wanting to be club captain. How, when he got the vice captaincy 2 years ago, that was a stepping stone, he called it, to where he wanted to get to. So, and also I think, previously when people like Michael Owen or Steve McManaman had gone to Real Madrid, deep down I think fans had to think, well, do you know what? We can't compete with that, because we're quite a long way off where we want to be. But I think the fact that Trent is walking away from the Premier League champions, I think people find that really tough to stomach. And then, of course, there's this whole narrative about to what extent has he engineered this. I think that's another thing that generates a lot of feeling. The fact that he's going for nothing, and when did he make his mind up? Has this been a long process where he's tried to get to this point? Now Slot himself has said that's not the case, and he knows that from his conversations with Trent that he really agonised over it. But of course, people are very entrenched on their opinions on this.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we aren't to know what on earth happened in the background. But also, Ollie, like any other human being, I would always say, yes, perhaps I said something last year, but mid-season, I just thought, maybe I fancy a new challenge. Who knows? But I guess the other conversation really is that, let's not forget, Liverpool have done something quite extraordinary this season. And, dare I say it, does this overshadow the brilliance of this team this season? And also huge credit to Arne Slot for what he's done taking over Jurgen Klopp, because this has been a wonderful season for Liverpool. Premier League champions once again.
Yeah, I don't think it overshadows it at all, but I think it overshadowed what was meant to be another day of celebration at Anfield on Sunday. I've got friends who were there who said that the atmosphere, absolute carnival atmosphere, party atmosphere for the first half, for the first hour, and that as soon as Trent Alexander-Arnold was about to come on and the mood changed dramatically, it killed the party and turned it into something very, very different. One of those parties that ends up in, fistfights and so on. But it is clearly going to be a big, big talking point for us in the media, and certainly for fans as well, over the next 11 days before the final game against Crystal Palace.
Yeah, you get a feeling that, and I do think about this when Arne Slot brought him on, James, probably no one thought it would be as major as this. It's a very weird one, because what should have been or could have been a great goodbye sort of feels like a I don't know, a very strange PR thing now. It's like, how do we manage this? How do we see the season out on a high without this actually being part of the narrative?
Yeah. I think everyone at Liverpool will be glad that there's that 8-day gap between games. Obviously, they don't play again till Brighton away next Monday night, and of course the players have kind of got away. They've been over in Dubai, continuing their title celebrations this week. Arne Slot himself has been over in Ibiza.
What, larging it up in Ibiza?
He has, yeah. He was at Ocean Beach. All right for some, while some of us are still grafting. But yeah, there's a lot of food for thought, isn't there, in terms of, as you said, in terms of how you handle this final stage of the season. Because I saw there was a lot of people I saw say that, you know, Slot made a mistake by bringing him on. I think that's unfair on the basis. I think there's a lot of hindsight there, because I didn't think that it would be anywhere near as bad as it was. And I also think from Slot's perspective, you got to remember he's known, you know, for certain that Trent Alexander-Arnold was leaving since March, and the reason he's continued to pick him when he's been fit is because there's been no drop off in terms of his, you know, commitment and attitude. So, and Conor Bradley at the minute, as gifted as he is, can't play 90 minutes. So, you know, as Slot said himself, bringing him on, there was no sentiment there. It wasn't, we'll give him a run out. It was, I want to win the game, and I'm bringing on an elite player to try and do that. And he kind of indicated that will continue to be his approach in the final two games. But I just wonder whether, you know, clearly there'll be discussions between Trent and Slot. I think probably to you know, work out where the player's head's at in terms of the final two games. Would it make more sense to, you know, have him as part of the squad but not bring him onto the pitch? Maybe. But even then, you've got, you know, as Oli touched on, you know, then you've got the trophy lift, and you've got the parade on the following Monday. You know, traditionally you'd expect each player to go up to the Kop with the trophy. You know, does Trent kind of just not have that moment, or does he still have that moment and just take whatever comes his way? You know, I've had some people say to me, he shouldn't be part of the trophy lift, he shouldn't be part of the parade. To me, that is absolutely nonsensical, because regardless of where you stand on his decision to leave, he's played 43 times this season. He's had a very good campaign in terms of the contribution that he's made. But yeah, how Liverpool handle that is going to be a real challenge, because and part of me thinks that a lot of those that felt that they wanted to say their piece and tell him exactly how they felt on Sunday, I wonder whether now they've done that, whether, you know, in the last two games they'll feel as if, you know, I've said my piece, now we move on.
Okay. Well, James, I really appreciate you joining us. I know you and Simon Hughes did put your opinions down on the Walk On podcast, so I do implore people to go listen to it. It's a really interesting listen, and actually some really good arguments on both sides. So, James, thank you so much for joining us on the pod today.
Cheers, guys.
Joining us now to delve deeper into the issue, we have our Manchester United writer, Carl Anka. Carl, look, Manchester United have had their own example of players being booed at home this season. Joshua Zirkzee, for instance, was brought off at home to Newcastle. From your memory, how unsavoury was that incident?
It was in December, so it was. This was a bad game for Manchester United in December that had saw the floor fall out of the majority of their season. I think aspirations of trying to get back into the top four became very clear that United weren't going to be or salvage a good season there. Manchester United were atrocious in that first half against Newcastle United. This team has had multiple issues against some of the more physical teams in the Premier League. And we all know that Newcastle are one of the most physical teams in the Premier League. So for the opening 30 minutes, United couldn't get a sniff. Something needed to change. Ruben Amorim made the decision to take off Joshua Zirkzee, make a sub. And he, unfortunately, became an unwitting scapegoat for the collective frustration of several weeks, if not months, of the Manchester United fans. It was first some cheers at the fact some sort of change was being made, which then sort of progressed into boos. There was then sort of a interesting reaction at Old Trafford where there was booing, but that felt it felt like as if a different section of United fans were booing the people who were booing, if that makes sense. Zirkzee then went off. To his credit, didn't go down the tunnel. and back into the dressing room, got into his jacket and sort of sat there looking quite sad, unfortunately. After the reaction afterwards was quite remarkable. So the next home game United had was against Southampton. Zirkzee is on the bench when he's doing his warm-ups and coming towards the Stretford end by the corner flag. A section of the Stretford end sang his name to the White Stripe song. So it's, oh, Joshua Zirkzee. Trying to indicate that the booing was a mistake and that they were willing to get behind him. Zirkzee, to his credit, has improved throughout this season. He's become a lot quicker releasing the ball. He looks physically fitter and more acclimatized to the pace of the Premier League. And a little bit similar to what Chris Woff has said about Joe Linton. He's gone from being a sort of misfiring number 9 to being operating a slightly deeper role and being applauded for his work rate in a slightly sort of quasi midfield role. So Zirkzee gets the penalty that gets Manchester United through to the FA Cup fourth round, waves off Arsenal at the Emirates Stadium, and people going, what an incredible turnaround. He gets a goal in against Real Sociedad in the Europa League as well, and it slowly feels like he's on his way to minor fan favourite status right now. And it all started, bizarrely, from being booed by Manchester United fans.
The Emmanuel Eboué one really hit me because I almost cried as an Arsenal fan thinking, can you just imagine being brought on and then being subbed off because of fans continuously booing you? But also, I don't know, maybe it's because I've got an African connection. I sort of just feel like he's out there on his own, in a different country trying to ply his trade. But, it's a really tricky one, isn't it, with football? Because, this country is not the only country to boo fans. We talk about Real Madrid booing their players when they're not performing that well. When it's down to performance, is it justifiable to a certain degree?
No, to be honest, I have a bigger problem with that. I have a bigger problem with the Eboué one because that was just a guy doing his best in a team that was low on confidence, miles away from home, doing his best for a team. I always feel with football, you can have your issues with a player. You can think that player's not good enough. You can think this coach is out of his depth. I don't feel you should ever really, really aggressively turn on a player or a coach because I know they are doing their best. Even if it's a manager you hate, you probably don't realise that he's working round the clock, ridiculous hours, giving sleepless nights, giving everything, trying and normally failing to find solutions. They get horrible treatment sometimes. I would have a different conversation sometimes about owners or chairmen or chief executives. I think those people often absolutely deserve the ridicule, derision, and worse, hostility of fans in some cases. But players, I generally don't think that. Certainly not when it comes down to the idea of if someone's done something egregious, if they've done something appalling, they dragged the club's name through the dirt, they've been unprofessional. But that wasn't the case with Emmanuel Eboué. It wasn't the case with Joe Linton or whoever examples we're mentioning. Can I go off on a bit of a tangent here?
You may.
I feel like there's a real, I was going to say North v South issue on this.
Okay.
But I think there's a real London issue with booing. Carl's not sure about this. What happened to Emmanuel Eboué? What happened to Davinson Sanchez a couple of seasons ago at Spurs? What's happened to Jorginho and various others at Chelsea, Raheem Sterling? I don't think you get that kind of reaction at Liverpool, at Manchester United, at Manchester City. Everton's a different matter because Everton have been absolutely in the mire for years. But there's generally a kind of almost unconditional, while somebody's wearing the shirt, while somebody's playing for us, we don't boo them attitude. I think at a lot of the northern clubs, northern fan bases, I don't think you have. For example, where we talk about the Zirkzee thing, it was really ugly, right? But it wasn't the scale, it wasn't the vitriol, it wasn't the ridicule that Emmanuel Eboué got, and that I don't know whether it's just a different mindset amongst fan bases. But I think there's generally a sense in those London grounds, you feel like it can turn against a player very quickly. And it has happened very often. It's happened with a number of players at Arsenal. It's happened with a number of players at Spurs, Chelsea, Man United. Obviously, they've been really miserable for the last decade, relatively speaking. They've underperformed terribly. There've been all kinds of... I mean, someone like Casemiro could easily be an absolute figure of hatred in another fan base. He's not.
Well,
the fans.
I don't know. I heard a lot of things about him last season.
Do you buy this theory? It's a north-south divide between how they boo their fans and treat their fans if they're not performing that well.
I mean, there's so many lenses we can apply to this. We can apply the north-south divide if you want. We can apply class, right? Because we can't. When we talk about the south in football, we're very often talking about London. I think it's important to specify differences there. We can also apply. There's a racial element in there that you can apply, racial lens you can put in there. So if we look at the players who have been booed by their own clubs, a lot of them in the 20 clubs that are on that piece are black football players. And then we can get into a discussion about who's allowed to be funny, who's allowed to be hardworking, who's allowed to be clever, who's allowed to be forgiven quickly. That's a different podcast for another time.
For sure.
That's a different podcast for another time. I'm not going to do that right now. So there's so many lenses about this. We can talk about whether academy players are more likely to be booed by their own plans or not. We can look at whether foreign players are more likely to be booed by or not. I'm sure right now someone is absolutely steaming at the ears and frothing out their mouth going, you have to bring up David Beckham after France 98 as well, because that's also a huge application. We can also...
That was a national thing
A national one. We can also apply another lens as to the impact of social media and how that has changed football, because a player like Sol Campbell getting a reaction, the reaction that he did in the Premier League during his time is quite different to the reaction that Paul Pogba was getting, because now there's this thing called Twitter that can serve as a hornet's nest. So there are loads of different lenses you can apply to it. And I think it's this, in many forms of life, there is a very interesting question as what do you do as a consumer or as a fan of something, and you cannot shake the feeling that your experience of this is getting worse. And what is a legitimate way to voice your unhappiness at the fact the thing you have paid for is worse than what it used to be. So the Manchester United fan who in the last 10 years is watching football players play nowhere near to the level that they used to under Sir Alex Ferguson's heyday. How do you express your anger or unhappiness at this? And sometimes that bubbles up in, I'm going to make a noise that goes boo at a football player who I don't think is good enough. Or the Tottenham Hotspur fan who is unhappy with their current ownership model and believes that it's hamstringing managers and it means that it puts a certain ceiling on. How do you voice that displeasure? And for some Hotspur fans, that means using certain hashtags and saying that you want the chairman to go. Now, I'm in no position to tell fans of other clubs how they should behave. I'm barely in any position to tell Manchester United fans how they can behave. But I think this is a really interesting thing in that we talk about it's not acceptable to do X and it's not acceptable to do Y, to which, okay, but what is the acceptable way for a football fan to go, I'm not having this? We talk about, the traditional economic argument is you vote with your wallet. So I haven't watched Star Wars in quite some time because I don't care for Star Wars anymore. I don't like the storyline they're doing. I don't particularly watch WWE week to week anymore because I don't particularly like the way they're doing storytelling here. And yet when you talk to economists, particularly those in the realm of entertainment, they all describe football fans or sports fans as a particularly unique case. They're a sticky. They describe them as a sticky consumer. They say if you've got brown eyes, the only thing you're more likely to pass on to your children than your surname is your sports fandom, right? We talk about how sports fans say this is in your blood, or they say I'm never leaving, or they say I'm doing this till I die. So you are unlikely to vote with your wallet. I've seen Everton fans go, I know next season's going to be absolutely terrible. Here, I'm paying up. I talked to Southampton fans this season who renewed their season ticket, going,
Southampton being relegated.
I'm doing this for 19 years. I'm not going to stop now. So that argument of well, the best way to voice your disagreement or your unhappiness with this is to stop paying money for it, doesn't quite apply for football fans. So then you go, well, if I don't want to stop paying and I can't boo, what else am I supposed to do? So it's a really misshapen thing of what's a legitimate, acceptable, correct way for football fans to go, I don't like this.
And I don't think we have any sort of conclusions. I'll be really honest with you. I think you're spot on. But also, I think you make a really good point in terms of the impact of social media in one respect. And also, I think about it from my position as a broadcaster, and I'm sure you guys think of it from your positions as journalists. I always think about the media, Oli, and punditry as well, and fan media as well, and how much this adds to this cauldron that can sometimes section off certain players to have, a dart thrown at them because they're not performing that well. Because now there is way more noise around if Sol Campbell wanted to move to Arsenal, for instance. There's so much noise around a story like that now than there ever has been.
Yeah, so imagine if 24 years on, the equivalent thing was to happen. Imagine if Harry Kane had run down his contract at Spurs and joined Arsenal on a free transfer. Can you imagine the backlash against that? I think that would have been on another level entirely. And I say that with full knowledge of how appalling and inhumane some of the abuse that Sol Campbell received was. Everything seems to be more extreme now. Opinions are more extreme, reactions are more extreme, and that was a pretty strong and enduring reaction back in the time, back in 2001. So look, I think, I've noticed, with our business changing, I feel like there was a time when the media would almost sort of dictate the public mood. So if players would be terrified of the idea of getting 6 out of 10 in a newspaper, and I've heard Gary Neville talk about, and I know it was the case at the time because that was a sort of running joke amongst the Manchester pack at the time. Gary Neville would be livid. First thing Monday morning, he'd look what mark out of 10 he'd got in the Manchester Evening News and the other papers, and if it was 6 out of 10, he'd go after the reporter in question. And it was 6 out of 10, quite a lot.
Behave.
Now these days, I don't think players give a stuff about.
No, incorrect.
What people in the newspapers say generally, or people on the Athletics. Sometimes something
they must do, Ollie. They must do. Do you not think they are aware of what's going on around them?
Oliver Kay, you cannot say that with a straight face.
I honestly no,
Mr. K.
If you say
Dr. K, please.
If you say what upsets players, it's generally not what is written in newspapers or in the Athletic or mainstream media. Sometimes if things are clipped and put on social media, or it's a headline and it appears on social media, but they're not looking at what marks out of 10 they're getting in a newspaper. They're not looking at that. It's when they're being ridiculed on fan sites or big sort of fan media sites, clips that go viral on social media. That is what really gets under players' skin now. It is. The people like Mark Goldbridge, I think, would have a bigger impression in the Manchester United dressing room than you or I, Carl, saying that somebody isn't playing well. It's the size of those reactions is it's a complete. I've got to get off on a complete tangent again. But I don't think the players. I don't think the media, the mainstream media, is what is necessarily driving that sort of discourse of, oh, this player's terrible.
I'm going to give you a very personal example of how the mainstream media and the wider social media form interacts. This is a personal anecdote. This happened to me earlier this season, a couple of weeks ago, in fact. Andre Onana has a bad performance in the first leg of the Europa League against Lyon, right? So the Onana, Matic, bing, bang, boom, followed by the Onana mistake. Errors, however, 2 goals conceded. And then after this happens, of course, the reaction from a large section of the online Manchester United hive mind is going, I've had enough of Andre Onana. I'm finished with Andre Onana. Blah, 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 Andre Onana. Andre Onana can't do this or 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 this. So I'm aware of this at full time. Pretty much on the full-time whistle, open my phone, all about Onana. And then myself, as a journalist, I'm going, right, okay, this is the prevailing mood. My job as a journalist is to reflect the prevailing mood, but also to try and inform, educate, enlighten, elevate this, right? At the very least, let me remove some of these swear words and clean up some grammar. So I go into the podcast and I write the story and I write my match piece about what's going on and saying, actually, there are some more concerning things than just what Onana did, although what Onana did was deeply unfortunate for both himself and the football team. Now, what happens to me after podcasts trying to keep it on a balanced keel rather than just effing and blinding about however someone might be feeling about Onana is from Friday until the next Premier League game of football, my phone, my comment section, my email request, are football fans going, why are you taking it so easy on Andre Onana? Right? And this is the new interesting form of mainstream journalism and online media and social media and whatnot, is that one of my mentors once described it as, you are the rock or the pebble in the emotional river they have, and you are causing some form of resistance by not saying Andre Onana or football player is XYZ. And this is what is going on with Trent Alexander-Arnold right now. Is it if James Pearce or if a very prominent Liverpool journalist who is got a high ranking byline on a place with very nice fonts went, it's okay to boo Trent Alexander-Arnold, that rock in the river goes up and the emotional pull just goes completely there, right? You're the Dutch boy. That's how I view myself now in certain situations when a player has an incident like this. When Harry Maguire, when people are saying all sorts of things as Harry Maguire, I'm trying to be fair and even-handed, but you're the Dutch boy. And multiple times after Onana's incident, I got 2 or 3 people email me stuff, have you seen this? I had one person message me saying, I don't want to cause a pylon on Andre Onana, but have you seen this? And it was an AI-generated collection of memes mocking Onana, to which I responded, if you're not trying to start a pylon on Andre Onana, why are you sending this to me? And this is the intersection right now, in that we are, and look, I've only been covering Manchester United for 5 years. My life on this planet, loving and watching football, is finite and not as large as other people. So I can't tell you if this is entirely new phenomenon or if this is what it's always been. But this is what I feel has been particularly, this is my feeling to how this sort of thing reacts and this kind of thing responds. And I think things have got worse since COVID, since we've returned back to football after COVID, because I think just the way we socialize with each other has been changed after lockdown. But what I find now is when football player has bad day or football player has done something bad that football fans want to yell at, what you often get now is sort of a collection of football fans sort of asking people in positions of power going, please give us the green light to go full anger or full mockery of this individual. For the most part, or at least I hope I do in my job, I don't necessarily go have at it and go completely for it. I do talk with the Devils. Andy Mitten often uses the term moderates to describe the Manchester United fan base. He says there's always going to be a certain amount of fan who gets completely annoyed whenever United lose 2-0 against anyone. But the moderates, for the most part, want to support the manager and want to support the players. And he often talks about moments where a football manager can lose the moderates. And I think that's a very interesting thing to look at as well, in that increasingly we are getting to a point where moderates don't actually behave in a moderate manner. And also moderates go, well, what is a legitimate way for me to voice my unhappiness with what is going on? And again, I don't have the answer to that.
Isn't it a fascinating conversation in terms of it? Is it the fault of the player, or are those frustrations from fans furthermore masking a deeper frustration that their club aren't performing that well. Because I think there's often a correlation here as to clubs that aren't doing that well at that moment in time and certain players not doing that well, but actually the player potentially gets the flack, as opposed to the wider structure that's not potentially allowing that player to either be as confident as they need to be or play their best football. Yeah.
Well, it's in a lot of the situations we've talked about that is exactly the case. I mean, the Emmanuel Eboué won, or the Granit Xhaka won at Arsenal.
But then you get a different situation of, does that make it feel better, or does that make you feel better, or does that make you feel worse? And again, Liverpool fans will have to tell us how they feel about that. It's really hard losing one of your best football players. It's incredibly hard when you lose a great football player, but also know you are very unlikely to get a player that good in that way ever again, or for a long time. And look, Liverpool are very good in the transfer market. They're going to buy. I think Conor Bradley's a good football player, and I trust Liverpool that if they do decide to go buy a right back or a right-sided defender this summer, that they will be a good right-sided defender. They will slot right in, if you pardon the pun. But are they going to be? But they're not going to be Trent Alexander-Arnold good, or good in that very unique way that Trent was.
But those players are unicorns,
sure.
Though,
and
that's the whole point.
And that's the point, right? And also, and I'm sorry, Liverpool fans, I'm going to bring up Manchester United now. It's when Cristiano Ronaldo left for Real Madrid. I was still in school when that happened. But it was particularly annoying when that happened for me. I'm speaking from personal experience as a Manchester United fan. It was particularly annoying for me because I went, but we're Manchester United. We've won the Premier League. We've won the Champions League. We're the biggest club in the world. Why on earth would anyone want to go somewhere else? And it was that horrible, gnawing sort of tap on the shoulder from Real Madrid. No, actually, bigger monsters on the continent that you may have X, Y, Z, and you may think you're having a nice moment, but there's that. So I suppose it's maybe that annoying moment as well of just, oh God, yeah, a tiny dent in your momentum of, there's a food chain in European football, and unfortunately you're not at the top of it, despite the fact you're having what I consider a really good season. If not, this is a golden age in Liverpool in the last 10 years. 10 years? Yeah, let's call it 10 years. So that's annoying as well. However, and yeah, how do you voice that frustration? If you, again, phrasing, right? I have a very, very nice friend who used to work for a very good newspaper in the United Kingdom, and they said to me during COVID that a lot of what you are seeing in the United Kingdom is men, and I'm very specific here. It is very often men who the conundrum is men going, I'm going to swear now, sorry. I feel shit, and I don't know what to do with the fact that I feel shit. And the only way I can get this feeling away from me is to make someone else feel shit. And you can see this in politics. You can see this in your sports fandom. You can see this in, even with NIMBYs arguing about the bins, right? A lot of people unable to deal with the temporary emotional discomfort or dissatisfaction of their life going, I don't know how to deal with this. I'm just going to push this feeling onto someone else. And I think that's what you got at Anfield. And I think I've seen that at Old Trafford on one or two occasions of football fans going, I don't know what to do with this horrible feeling, so I'm just going to push it onto this person. And when someone else with glasses and talks into a podcast mic goes, you shouldn't do that to a football player, very often one of the very first replies is, well, that person's on loads of money. Like, they can deal with it. And you're like, well, they are still a human being. You can pay me 12 million a year, but I still don't want to be called XYZ on every single device and every single format there. And this is the nub.
All right, let's end it there. Carl, Oli, thanks for your insight. Also, James for joining us earlier. And also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also leave us a comment as well. Right, that is it from us. We're back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anka, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.